right, Federalist Era Part 6. We're just about to get into the actual issues that planted the seeds of partisan politics in this country. And where we left off, the last one just kind of dropped abruptly. That's just how it worked out. Had to chop off some stem at the end that I'll come back to, maybe. But Hamilton had perceived that to establish political stability, what you have to do is give the middle and upper classes of the population a vested financial interest in maintaining the present form of government. You do that by putting the national government in debt to them, and it was so that already, but that's not necessarily going to be enough because at the outset they don't really believe that the debt was going to be paid. Give them some confidence that it will be paid in full with interest only if and only if the present government established by the Constitution hangs around long enough to do it, then it's going to be safe. So that's why he saw the national debt as a blessing. All right. His proposal in the report on the public credit, there were two main parts of it. This isn't the whole thing, but this is the main parts, were called funding and assumption. We'll start with funding. Hamilton proposed refinancing the national debt. Okay. Particularly the $42 million owed to American citizens in the form of these nearly worthless continental bills that were still circulating. Okay. You refinance a debt by taking out a new loan to pay off an old loan. That's basically what this was. Now, the big surprise that took everybody completely off guard is that Hamilton is proposing refinancing the entire national debt at full face value, not any stinking 5 cents on the dollar. Whoa. So the way it was going to work, that anybody who had these old continental bills, that you could turn them into the Treasury Department and receive in exchange new bonds, federal bonds, which are superior in two ways. One is their full face value. When you'd be laughed at if you thought it'd ever be more than about 10 cents on the dollar. It's going to be full thing. Plus, they bear interest at 4% APR from the date of issue. And they carry a maturity date. The date on there, it's going to be a few years down the road, but when that date arrives, you could turn in that bond to the Treasury Department and receive in exchange full value plus the 4% interest, accrued interest, in hard money. That's going to be silver coinage. Okay. So that looks pretty good. It would give a great many people an extremely strong interest in what they care about the federal government is a good idea or not. Quickly is in the back seat. What's driving the thing is they have a realistic hope that they're going to come out really good on this. All right. So that's funding the national debt. Now, along with that, another part of the plan would set up a tax, which I think was already there. In 1791, Congress set up a tariff. That's a tax on imported goods. It's kind of the thing we fought the War of Independence to get rid of, but this time we're doing it. It would provide the federal government with a steady source of income, which it could use to meet this financial obligation that they're taking on. Okay, so that's funding. Next, assumption. So if funding is going to, in effect, purchase the political loyalty of powerful classes of people, assumption is going to take that still further. Hamilton may have thought something like this. Hey, if some national debt is good, more is better. So assumption called for the federal government assuming the remaining unpaid debts that the states, every state had gone into debt during the time of the Revolution. Some of the states, mostly the southern ones, all but South Carolina, had paid theirs off. The northern ones had not, and some of them were still deeply in debt. Just take that away, and that would be lumped into the national debt. And that would increase the national debt. And remember, more is better because it's buying a lot of political support, from 42 million owed to American citizens out to, I don't know, seems like 68 million. And this is a loyalty thing. If you're a creditor of the state of Massachusetts, then it's Massachusetts against the world, because where your treasure is, there would your heart be also. Now you're a creditor of the new federal government, and it's federal government against the world. Do you see how this works? And it's not, you're not pleading with people to be emotionally loyal. It's not going to get you anywhere. But if there's money in it, that's going to work as far as Americans are concerned. All right, so funding and assumption. Both of these drew criticism. The main criticism of funding was that there's nothing in there to relieve the original holders of the debt. What does that mean? That means back during and after the Revolution, when the Continental Congress needed to buy foodstuffs or other supplies for the army or anything like that, all they had to pay for it with were these Continentals. And so soldiers get paid in them, farmers and merchants get paid in them. They're not really worth anything. Most of them had long since spent these things at rates deeply discounted, far below the face value. They're gone now. So by 1790 or 91, most of these bills that are still there have passed into the hands of wealthy speculators who buy them up very cheaply and just hold on to them just in case they might be worth more later. That's what speculation is. You buy something cheap hoping that it will go up in value and you can reap a capital gain. All right. So what about the people, the original holders? Hamilton conceded that yes, it would be very nice if we could take care of those people, but we don't know who they are. And if we just open the door on that, everybody and their dog's third cousin is going to say, I had about $800 back in '83. And you don't know for sure. You just can't do it. It's not popular. It's not possible, not practical. But the advantages were so obvious that objection was overcome. Far more problematical is assumption. All the southern states, except South Carolina, which was an economic basket case, they'd paid off their Revolutionary War debt. So this is going to help the northern states way more than the southern. Assumption would not have passed by itself. To get it through, Hamilton was obliged to have his allies in Congress connect them together. So in order to get funding, you had to accept assumption. So those two both did pass. Now Hamilton was surprised when his old ally and collaborator on writing the Federalist Papers, James Madison, rose up in opposition. Madison was Jefferson's point man in the House of Representatives. Madison opposed it, not so much because he thought it was a bad idea financially or economically. That wasn't the thing. The thing with Madison is that he looked at this the same way Jefferson did. This would be a move toward turning the nation and its fate over to businessmen and bankers who, like Jefferson, and for the same reason, he deeply distrusted. So that plan was put into effect, and rest of the story, it worked like a charm. Before the decade was out, these bonds had begun to mature, and Treasury Department officials, you turn in your new bonds, they're going to, without batting an eyelash, they're going to pay them out in full face value, hard cash, plus accrued interest. It worked to the extent that for the moment there, the credit of the federal government, which had not even been a funny joke at the start, it was better. The credit rating, that sort of thing, was better than that of the British government. Rose from the dead. Okay, so that polarized people. There are congressmen taking sides, one side or the other, based on whether they were looking at this through the Hamiltonian lens or the Jeffersonian lens. Well, next up, Hamilton doesn't waste any time by coming up with another report, this one unsolicited, I don't know if this is technically the name of it. We'll call it the Report on a National Bank. Hamilton wants to establish something called the Bank of the United States. Now, banking was new. There really wasn't banking in a modern sense in America until around about the time of the Articles period, and states began chartering banks. Banking was not popular because people's values were rooted in biblical values, and the usury, that's basically charging interest for a monetary loan, that's condemned in the scriptures. So there's that. It had a bad taste to it. But now, the Bank of the United States. See, if you're a Jeffersonian now, what do you think about this? This would also be known as the National Bank. It would be both a central bank and a commercial bank. Okay? A central bank offers banking services, provides banking services to the government and to the business community. So, well, the government and to the commercial banks. Commercial banks, like the bank down the street here, is a commercial bank. It's a business. It's operated for the purpose of earning a profit. So, the central bank, in this case the Bank of the United States, would provide banking services to the commercial banks that were being established as well. Okay, if you borrowed money from the national bank or the commercial banks either, what you're going to walk out the door with is not a bag of coins. It's going to be bank notes that would circulate, depending on whether the bank seemed sound or not. So it'd be an unofficial paper currency. All federal revenues would be deposited in the Bank of the United States, which was headquartered in Philadelphia, which gave it enormous power. It's going to be a 900-pound gorilla. Now, one secret to the extreme and just amazing financial stability of the British government was a central bank known as the Bank of England. Been there since the 1690s. Deeply well established. Hamilton looks at that and says something like, we got to get us one of those. All right. So that's the idea. This was more controversial, and it takes the political polarization further. Madison rose up in opposition with a kind of a creative way of opposing it. It introduces a type of constitutional interpretation known as strict construction or strict interpretation. In this case, construction is not like building a building. Construction is the noun form of a verb, construe, which means to interpret something. So it's like strict interpretation. Hamilton charged that legislation to create this bank was unconstitutional. Why? Because you could read the Constitution any number of times, upside down, backward, forward, whatever, in any ancient or modern language, and you will not find in there anywhere where it authorizes Congress to grant a corporate charter to a bank or any other kind of corporation. Therefore, it's unconstitutional. His proof text was the newly ratified Ninth Amendment, which, read it sometime, you read it and say, what? And you read it again, you say, what? It's a little slippery, but basically it's called the Reserve Powers Clause. And it states that the powers that are not granted by the Constitution to the federal government, pretty much meaning explicitly in so many words granted, are reserved to the states or to the people. The Supreme Court stopped applying that quite a while back because if they applied it, that means most of the federal bureaucracy would be unconstitutional. Okay. Hamilton's response, he said it was constitutional, and he's introducing another way of constitutional interpretation called loose or liberal construction. Now, the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that's the legislative branch, lists in like 17 or 18 clauses specific powers granted to the Congress. And at the end of the list, there's something called the elastic clause or the necessary and proper clause. Congress shall have power to make any and all laws which shall be necessary and proper to the carrying into execution of the foregoing powers. And since borrowing money is constitutional, bank facilitates that. That makes it constitutional. Congress can coin and regulate the value of money. Bank helps with that. Makes it constitutional. So there you are. And so that's the argument. And we will finish the argument in part 7. Okay, bye.